Thank you so much for joining us. It's really nice to see everybody. So this is a Data Science Centre monthly webinar, which we have every month. And this month it's a little bit different because we're focusing on research communications. I'm really pleased that Leanne Grech from the BHF is joining us today, and she will be kicking off things very shortly. And then we're also going to be joined by Shane Canning, who is Head of Corporate Comms at the University of Edinburgh, and recently moved over from research comms at the press office there. Just to say, this meeting will be recorded and it will be available shortly afterwards online on the HCR UK YouTube channel. We will have a talk from Leanne and then Shane, and then we'll have questions at the end. But feel free to put your questions in the chat if possible. If everyone could please keep their video and their mics off for now. At the end, you can either put your question in the chat or stick your hand up. That's absolutely fine. You might want to put on speaker view if you wanted as well. That might make it a bit easier to see. Also, last thing I was going to say, if you want to take part in these webinars, if you would like to present in one of these webinars, we hold them every month. And we'd be really happy to hear from you, so just drop me an email. But yeah, without further ado, really excited to hear from Leanne. She's a Research Engagement Manager at the BHF, and obviously they're our major funder at the BHF Data Science Centre. We work with them really closely, and they're great friends and colleagues. So they're doing some really exciting stuff over there about engagement. So I'll hand over to Leanne.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. The second I'm going to share my slides. Let me know if you can see them. Yeah, all good?
Yeah, we can see them.
Lovely. Hi, everyone. Yes, Kate said, I'm Leanne. I'm the Research Engagement Manager at the British Heart Foundation. You may already know this, but the BHF is the single biggest independent funder of cardiovascular research in the UK. In recent years, we've invested around £100 million each year in research into heart and circulatory diseases. Now, my job is to bring that life-saving research to life, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. But before I do that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. The accent, in case you're trying to guess, is from Malta, which is where I did my BSc in biology and chemistry. I then went to UCL for an MSc in biomedical sciences and a PhD in genetics. Straight after my PhD, I worked for a small charity called Into Science UK, whose aim is to encourage and empower young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to choose STEM careers. And I then joined the BHF 4.5 years ago, and I've not looked back since. So yeah, as I was saying, my job in the research engagement team is to bring the BHF's life-saving research to life for lay audiences. You know, not everyone knows that we fund medical research. Some people still think we're just a shop on the high street. You know, they don't know that the sofa that they bought last weekend for their new living room could help save a life. And we want to change that, you know, because the more we talk about research, the more awareness is raised. So in a nutshell, we talk about our research with two main audiences: the public and external stakeholders, and our staff and volunteers. So let's start with the public and external stakeholders. How do we bring our research to life for them? So we have live and ticking. Our live and ticking events are, you know, these are monthly. They started in July 2020 to highlight the BHF's work at a time when face-to-face events were not possible. Since then, we've gained a loyal following with our warm supporters, as well as attracting new audiences to our work. And every month we have a heart story, a patient and a supporter who comes to talk about their experience of their condition. We also have a BHF researcher, a BHF-funded researcher, who gives a layman talk about the science behind the condition. This month, for example, the event is on recovering after heart surgery. We have Professor Sally Singh and her research fellow in Leicester discussing how to increase the uptake of cardiac rehab, which could reduce hospital admissions and improve the health and quality of life for many people in the UK. We have a live audience, and they're encouraged to submit questions to our speakers during the event, and depending on the subject matter, a cardiac nurse from our clinical team may also be on the call to answer questions. Each event is broadcast live for an hour, and the recording is uploaded to our YouTube channel the following week. And since 2020, so since we started, we've had over 4,000 people in total attend on the day, and over 38,000 people overall watched YouTube recordings. So that's over 41,000 people we've told about our research, 41,000 people who now don't just think that we're just a shop on the high street. We also have the Heart Matters magazine. It's another avenue through which we shout about our research. We have over 400,000 subscribers. It's a printed and online magazine for people living with a heart condition. And it has anything from lifestyle advice, heart health recipes to try at home. And we also have interviews with BHF funded researchers. For example, I recently interviewed Professor Paolo Madedu in Bristol, whose research has shown that it could slow down the aging of the heart, which I think is really fascinating. We also have a day in the life section where researchers take us through what a typical day in their life looks like as a researcher. Occasionally, we also invite BHF researchers to speak on our Ticker Tapes podcast. So far, we've recorded one with Professor Mark Kearney in Leeds and another one with Dr. Richard Dissett at Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London. So there's many ways in which we get our researchers involved. It's not just we give them funding and then we expect them to just get on with it in the lab. We also make sure that they are involved in our engagement activities. At the BHF, we believe it's important to thank those who support us, who are helping to make a difference towards fulfilling our vision of a world free from heart and circulatory diseases. And this is where the Heart Hero Awards come in. Once a year, we come together and we celebrate the incredible fundraisers, young advocates, healthcare professionals, outstanding supporters who go above and beyond for the BHF. And one of the categories of the Heart Hero Awards is the BHF Media Award, Research Story of the Year. Was previously known as, just in case you think it's a bit different, as the Research Engagement Award. And this award recognizes an amazing research story showcased by the BHF. Now, 3 of the most interesting, inspiring, engaging BHF research projects taking place around the UK are shortlisted. And then it's the public who will have the opportunity to delve deeper into our life-saving science and choose their favorites to win the award. Professor Pablo Lamata at King's College London, he won last year's Research Engagement Award. And I really like what he said in his speech, and he said that research is like a roller coaster and public engagement recharges our motivation batteries. And I think that's true as an ex-scientist myself for a lot of researchers. I think motivation comes from seeing that their work could make a real difference in people's lives, whether you're in a wet lab, whether you're in a dry lab, you just want to make a real difference in people's lives. That's why a lot of us get into science. And the Heart Hero Awards gives them a chance to see that. And incidentally, if you think you recognize the woman on the left, it's because she is the winner of last year's Great British Bake Off. Her name is Shabira Yusuf, Dr. Shabira Yusuf. And not only did she win the Great British Bake Off, but she is also, I don't know if you knew this, but she is also a BHF funded researcher. She's a research associate specializing in vascular science signaling. Yeah, you can imagine we're very, very happy. We're rooting for her all the while, but we're very happy when she won. Research, is at the heart of what we do at the BHF, and therefore so are our researchers. Their success is our success, and our triumphs are also theirs. So when we feature their life-saving work in a press release, picked up by top media outlets, when we have an event series viewed by thousands, it means more exposure of their work and more support to the cause from the general public. So from the big fundraising campaigns, like when we were our partners for the London Marathon, the Omaze £1 million house draw, which raised an incredible £2 million, to smaller events like the Kilt Walk, like cycling 60 miles for our 60th birthday. Our researchers are helping us make a difference, even when they're not in the lab. But then they also help us in the lab, obviously, when they're doing the research, but also when they help organize lab visits for our celebrity ambassadors, for our policymakers. So on the slide, you can see Sarah Ferguson in the top left. She's the Duchess of York. She's one of our celebrity ambassadors. Got James Hepburn, member of the Scottish National Party, and a few members of the House of Commons Science and Technology Select Committee. So this falls within the remit of the policy team. We've got a policy team at the BHF whose job is primarily to work with parliamentarians and members of the government to shape and influence policy that relates to heart and circulatory diseases and research. Because you may already know that, but many decisions that are made in government can have an impact on research, from the amount of money that is invested in science to the rules around accessing health data. I know some of you here are data scientists. So it's important for policymakers to be able to see firsthand the amazing work being carried out in BHF labs around the country. Because if they see it, we can influence them, we can influence their thinking, and we can actually make a difference. Occasionally, we also like to have a little bit more fun, and we attend face-to-face festivals, such as, for example, Cheltenham Science Festival, New Scientist Live. And they're a great way of reaching out to cold supporters, the people who still see us as a shop on the high street. And for these festivals, we've created games based on our research with input from our researchers. So top left, start with the gene pool, for example. It's filled with a lot of different cells, balls, found in the human heart. You search through the sea of cells for the ones that could hold the key to heart repair, so the clear balls. And if you find them, you could be closer to finding a cure for heart damage, the holy grail of cardiovascular research. Going across to the right, the ring toss. I love this game. So you have 4 different colored pegs, and each of them, they present an aspect of heart regeneration. So if you manage to land a ring on a colored peg, it means you've cracked that particular problem and you've understood one aspect of how to heal the human heart. The difficulty of landing a ring on any peg shows how hard it can be for researchers to get it right. If only it was that easy, eh? Then going to the Beat the Biology game, it's similar to the classic whack-a-mole, and you've got a hammer, you hit the bad antibodies while trying to avoid hitting the good antibodies. Because if you hit the good ones, if you hit the good antibodies, you might weaken your body's defenses against infection. It's a great game. I find it's very good at relieving stress, and I've used it many a times when I needed it. And then finally, the Wooden Labyrinth. We've got lots of games. These are just some of my favorites. The Wooden Labyrinth. So it's a box with a maze on top, and it's littered with precariously placed holes. And your job is to tilt the playfield and guide a marble to the end of the maze without letting it fall into any of the holes. It's not as easy as it sounds, kind of like research. And here, in fact, the holes represent some of the hurdles in the current search for therapies. For example, one of the holes says side effects of the drugs. So yeah, this is just to give you a little bit of taster of what we do when we go and meet some of our cold supporters. Absolutely love these games. They're so fun to play. And yeah, this is when I realized I just love my job. It's fun. Cool. So yeah, as I said earlier, we don't only bring research to life for the public and external stakeholders. We also do it for our staff and volunteers. And that is the Talk Research Initiative. We have thousands of staff and volunteers at our fingertips. We've got people in the IT department and philanthropy and corporate affairs, corporate partnerships, and a lot of them do not really have a science background. So we have to explain to them what research we're funding. We have an untapped resource of research champions, and we want to inspire and empower them all to talk confidently about our research. So we have things like the science induction for new colleagues, designed to connect them with our cause. We have weekly multiple choice questions based on our research, quarterly meetings to share the most exciting recently funded projects. We also invite BHF researchers to cut the ribbon and give a talk at some of our shop openings, which researchers love because it gives them a chance to see where the money is coming from for their own research. And the list goes on. We do so many things with our staff and volunteers, but essentially we're always trying to make sure that they are informed, that they remain informed and inspired. And I find that before I finish, I always find that with a lay audience, the key is to use accessible language and analogies. I think analogies are such a great way of making the complicated simple. For example, we like to compare autophagy, so the breakdown of cell parts which are old or not needed, to spring cleaning. The time of year kind of like right now when you remove things and that you consider old, things you no longer need. So in our bodies, the equivalent of spring cleaning is autophagy. Same with atherosclerosis. We like to compare our arteries to the pipes your water flows through to get to the bathroom sink. When the pipes are clear, water flows easily through them. But when minerals, rust, and other debris get stuck in the pipes, it clogs them up, leaving less room for the water to flow through. And that's why you get nothing more than just a drip when you turn on your bathroom sink. And in your arteries, clogs are caused by plaque. And because plaque is sticky, it collects to your artery walls and blocks the flow of blood. Now, to you and me, that's atherosclerosis. It's a mouthful. A lot of our staff and volunteers, I'll say it to them 100 times over and they might not remember it, but they will remember the clogged pipe. And that is why analogies are so great. Same with stem cells. And this is my favorite. We compare stem cells to little kids who, when they grow up, they can choose to be anything they want to be. They can choose any profession. So a child might become a doctor, a fireman, a hairdresser, a plumber, depending on the influences in their life, depending on their environment. So in the same way, stem cells can become any type of cell by making certain changes in their environment. So anytime I'm talking about stem cells and regenerative medicine, I always use this analogy. It really helps to use comparisons to explain complex new ideas by linking them to something familiar. So if you take away anything from this talk, I would say let it be these two things. Anytime you're talking to a lay audience, use accessible language and analogies. And another thing, which I'm not sure, like when I was a researcher, I didn't quite realize this, but over the last 4.5 years at the BHF, I've come to realize that the public thinks so highly of researchers, and they absolutely love to hear from them. Anytime we do a live and ticking with our researchers and we get feedback from our viewers, they always say how much they love hearing from the researchers themselves. So yeah, just bear it in mind. And yeah, I think that's it from me. I appreciate it was a whistle-stop tour of the BHF's research engagement activities. I hope you found it interesting and useful. And if you've got any questions, any ideas about your own research and how to bring that to life, just get in touch with us on talkresearch@bhf.org.uk. Thank you. Over to you, Kay.
Oh, thank you, Leanne. That was so good. I've got loads of questions for you, but I'll keep them for the end. So much. Shane, you're up next to kind of talk more about kind of press and PR. Thanks.
Okay. So I'll try to share my screen now. There we go. So I'm Shane Canning. As Kate said, I'm head of corporate communications at the University of Edinburgh. Up until last week, I was interim head of research communications, and I've spent nearly 10 years working in the area of kind of research communications in the media through either various funders or publishers. So kind of even on corporate communications now, I have kind of been mostly in the area of scientific research before that. So I'm talking about the University of Edinburgh's press office, but I think this can apply easily to any kind of organisation that's working in the field of research. So I'm sure the BHF's press office will work in a similar way, or HRD or UK. So at the University of Edinburgh's press office, what we do to kind of is work with the media to promote and safeguard the university's reputation. So that's kind of, I suppose, the corporate communications angle that I'm working in at the moment. So that's talking about the university as an entity in itself, but also, a way of promoting the university's reputation is through the work that we do here, through the research that we carry out. So that's why we do media work, to kind of make people aware of that. So we do that in two very different ways. So we do proactive work, which is when we offer them up as stories. So this is through kind of press releases or pitches or kind of.
Shane, sorry to interrupt, just to let you know you're sharing in presenter mode.
Am I?
Yeah, sorry. Just if we could change, if you wanted to change that.
Yeah, no worries. Let me see. Does that work?
Yep, I think that's better. Yep, yeah, perfect.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks for flagging that. Reactive work is when we kind of, so journalists will often get in touch if there's a big story in the media and they want to kind of get a scientist's view on that, and kind of in terms of what that means in terms of the bigger picture, or also commenting on other people's work to kind of get an independent view on some research. And our press office, and again, all the press offices that I've worked with in terms of the MRC, the MHR, or Biomed Central, is made up of people with a wide range of experience, from former journalists to people kind of who have studied PR, or like myself, I describe myself as a lapsed biochemist. I studied biochemistry at university. So there's many reasons why you might want to engage with the media. When you are setting out to kind of do media work, it's really kind of important to think about that. So why you want to do it, what your objectives are. So kind of some of the reasons you might want to do that is it's an effective way to reach large audiences. An example of that would be the Radio 4's Today program, which is 6 million listeners each week. The Mail Online has 518 million readers each month. The Guardian website has 350 million readers a month. It can also be about a way of bringing in funding. It's making your work visible to potential donors or kind of other funding bodies or charities who may kind of then want to kind of help support other work that you're doing in terms of providing financial support, but also providing support in kind. One example is a press release I worked on about kind of endometriosis and the use of a drug there, and a drug company afterwards got in touch to say that they had a similar drug and had offered to work with our researchers in terms of providing that drug off the back of the media coverage. It can also help create collaborations. I've also had press releases kind of go out in previous roles where because it's been picked up internationally, other groups have got in touch who are working in a similar area, offering to work with research groups to kind of, work together to kind of to a similar goal. Particularly in the field of health, you may want to be kind of encourage change in behavior. If you want to kind of encourage people to be kind of more healthy, or think about kind of public health aspects or interventions, this could be a key way of doing it through the media. Also, if you may just want to increase awareness of a particular subject or issue that you think is not kind of being discussed enough within the kind of public at the moment. And a key aspect of doing kind of media around health studies is to recruit people to be part of those studies. So when you're launching an RCT, you want to get as many people signed up as possible, and one of the best ways of reaching as many people as possible is through the media. So when thinking about doing kind of media work, one of the first things that we kind of need to think about is what is news? What is it that we're communicating? I always say one of the most important things in news is the first three letters, NEW. What's new? People want to know what's kind of something that's exciting, something they've not heard about before, something kind of that is just completely brand new to them. It's news also kind of, generally speaking, is it the interesting or significant events around the world that that we're all interested in, but also conversely, all news is local. You want to know what's happening in your neighborhood, in your town, in the country that you live. So you want to kind of you have to think about that aspect in terms of kind of this is my final point, who cares? So who is this news for? And in terms of what it counts as news, it will vary from news outlet, to news outlet. So some outlets will have a specific editorial line, but also, some outlets will be more targeted to specialist audience. So it's keeping that in mind when you're thinking about, is something what you're working on considered news. In terms of news values, these is what we think about when we are kind of, writing a press release or or pitching a story. Is it a world's first? Is it the biggest, is it the biggest trial in the world, or is it the, if you're talking about kind of an animal, is it the biggest animal in the world, biggest dinosaur, again, smallest, quirky? Is it something that kind of, that just doesn't kind of fit in with the norm or challenges the way that we regularly think about things? Again, for health stories, human interest is really important. We need to think about kind of, what, how does this impact on my life? How does this impact, on my relatives' life, on my mother, my brother, my sister, or my friends and my family? And also kind of then the opposite of that, would be societal impact. What does this mean kind of for us as a society in terms of, is this going to change how we live, or is this changing how we will kind of, work in the future? AI is a big example of that. That's, in a lot in the media at the moment. So how do we make a kind of science story newsworthy? So we work with researchers very closely to communicate their work. I think kind of one of the most important things for us is to make sure that we're communicating it accurately, but we also want to communicate it clearly. So we want to kind of find kind of a place where we know that we're portraying the science in a very kind of interesting, newsworthy way, but we're not distorting it or hyping it or anything like that. And how we tell the story of the research depends on the research itself. So I know kind of a lot of kind of scientists will have spent years kind of working kind of to pull their paper together in terms of kind of their analysis and kind of experiments they've run and things like that. But sometimes, for a news release, we may not kind of want to put that level of detail in there, because this is not the kind of the newsworthy part of it. So there's various things that we will do. I've mentioned also a press release, which is kind of about 400 to 600 words. I always say to think about it as a press release as the opposite of your article abstract. You talk about your results first and the relevance, and then you kind of talk a bit about kind of what you did, and then kind of provide a kind of more background. It's the reason we do it this way is journalists, particularly health and science journalists, can receive up to 200 press releases a day into their inbox, and you've got about 30 seconds to catch their attention. So that's why it's really important that we kind of get that kind of important detail right at the beginning, right at the top. There's sometimes though where we might be a bit more targeted, so we might kind of do a pitch, offering exclusive to a journalist. And the reason we do this is because we think there's a bit more kind of there's a bit more kind of chance of success there, in kind of engaging the journalist around that kind of piece of work, and it also means guaranteed piece of coverage. So when preparing a press release, there's various things that we do. So we kind of identify what's the newsworthy angle. So that's our top line. We think about kind of what is the kind of the thing that will kind of get journalists hooked, that will kind of keep them reading right to the end of your press release. So it's thinking about, again, the traditional news values of the who, what, why, where, and what, and when. So we try to kind of craft in the text in a very simple language, and I think it's also kind of in a world where we're trying to reach media outside of the kind of the UK sometimes, or kind of we're just trying to reach a kind of very broad audience. We need to think about kind of keeping the language as simple as possible. I don't think this is the same as dumbing down. It's more about kind of just making it accessible to any level of reader. We also kind of include an engaging quote at the end that's kind of summing up what the research found in terms of what's surprising to them, or what was unexpected, or what they think kind of this work means kind of for the future in terms of implications for health, or implications for society, or for the NHS, or things like that. it's also important to acknowledge funders and the journal in a press release. The reason being is this is just being very transparent in terms of who has supported this work, and also, some people might be interested in reading a bit more. The press release is only to give a taster. So by naming the journal, it gives an opportunity for the public to go and read a paper if they want to, especially in the age of open access publishing. So then we've kind of got all this together. What we think about is when we distribute it. So that's what I cover in the next slide. So in an ideal world, we like to distribute under embargo. That's why I would advise you, if you ever have a paper accepted, you should, and you think it might be newsworthy, contact your press office immediately. I wouldn't wait for the journal to confirm a publication date with you. In the world of online publishing, this can be very quick. So as soon as it's accepted, I would let your press office know. That's when they can start working with you on drafting a press release or pitching it. So that means if we can get it ready before the paper is published, we'd like to distribute it under embargo. That means that we distribute it up to 24 or 48 hours, or sometimes some of the journals like Nature or Science may distribute it a week in advance. This means that it gets that journalists agree not to write anything or to report on this until the embargo lifts, which usually is the publication date and time. And the reason that we do this is it gives journalists the time to read a bit more, and it also gives them time to plan their week ahead in terms of what stories they'd like to write. So some journalists, they will lift the press release as it is and take the copy that way, but some and most I think science and health journalists within the UK will want to write their own copy and and it takes a bit of time to do that. They also may call or email with questions, wanting to speak to the researchers, and they'll do that through the press office, who will help arrange interviews. So sometimes if a story is pretty big, it's about managing the researchers' time to make sure that they're not overwhelmed and booking things into their diary for them. So and once the paper has gone out, the press release has gone out and the paper has been published, the next thing we do is we monitor coverage in the UK and in Edinburgh, around the world, and we then look at the coverage to make sure that it's been reported accurately and any questions that may have arisen from that. But we then collate that all into a report and send it across to the research team. So I'll just talk through a couple of examples of things that we've done in Edinburgh, just to demonstrate what I've just been talking about. So this is a press release from 2 years ago when the vaccine program first started for COVID-19 in Edinburgh. We some of you may have heard of the E2 project, which was monitoring the rollout of the vaccine in near real time. In Scotland, we have a thing called the CHI number, the Community Health Index number, which means that it's possible to track what's happening with the NHS or what was at the time what was happening with COVID infections and how well the vaccine was working. So that meant that we were one of the first people in the world to be able to say how the vaccine is working in a real world setting. Up until that, it had always been in clinical trials. So we worked with the research team here and in Public Health Scotland and also with HDR UK to prepare this press release and get it out. And we also did a Science Media Centre briefing where we allowed journalists to come and speak to the research team and to get a bit more questions, in terms of detail about the study. That and it's also, I think it's really helpful, particularly for studies that are very data heavy. So it lets the academics explain a bit more about their findings, but also for the journalists to really drill down into what that means. So based on that, here's some headlines from the coverage that we received. And that was because it was some of the first data in the world. It was covered in lots of different places, including the New York Times, and it was pretty much very much in every national outlet across the UK. Then so as I mentioned about pitching a story. So this is when we approach a journalist and we offer them an exclusive, and we do this for various reasons. So if it's not very clear cut, in terms of what the interesting thing is, like I said, in a press release, we need to get a journalist's attention in the first two opening lines. And if we don't have that kind of in the press release, then it gets closed, deleted. Whereas, there is something interesting there, and it just takes a while to kind of get into it. That's where we might consider pitching a story kind of to a journalist, or we think about kind of this research is interesting, but it's only interesting to a kind of certain number of people. So that's where we might kind of pitch it to a specialist outlet. Or if there's something kind of particularly sensitive about the subject, the research, or kind of it needs a bit more nuance, that's why we kind of we give it to a journalist as an exclusive, because like I said, it's guaranteed coverage. But usually if a journalist gets an exclusive, and they tell their editor about it, that means they'll get a bit more space in the paper to write it up, where that nuance and the sensitivity can be covered. So here's an example of something that we did in terms of providing a pitch to the Guardian exclusive. No, sorry, it's the Observer, Robin McKee, where we were talking about kind of how gene edited sheep have been helped in terms of like potentially finding a new treatment for a form of childhood dementia. We've worked with this journalist before on this study, and we know it's kind of a sensitive topic in terms of kind of, it's animal research, but it's also gene editing, and we just wanted it to be covered in a way that we knew would portray the research in an accurate light. So that's why we approached this journalist and we offered it an exclusive, and he was fine to go with it. So as well as it's kind of in the traditional media, there's other ways that you may want to promote your research, and you can think about kind of, so it can be through comment pieces. So this can be comment pieces in the paper, but also either a blog article that you might want to write, or kind of there's platforms out there like The Conversation, so you can pitch kind of there. Again, it might be that a comment piece might be about something that's topical in the media at the moment, and your research is in that field, and you think you can kind of inform a bit of the public debate by engaging in kind of this form of communication. Social media, so this is kind of through the likes of Twitter or Instagram or kind of LinkedIn. That's a great way of kind of sharing with your peers. Infographics, if there's, again, if there's something that's very data heavy, infographics can be a really great way of kind of putting that in focus. Or, if there's videos, you can kind of do a video of infographic, or also you can just do a piece to camera talking about your work and the importance of it. And then kind of quotes, and what I mean by quotes is, often kind of third-party opinions. So a journalist might get in touch with you and say, oh, I'm writing up about this, I've received this press release on this paper, would you be able to kind of provide your view on it? Or so Science Media Centre will often send out requests for comments on a piece of research that they think is going to get a bit of coverage. So that can be a way of kind of promoting your work and kind of what you're doing through the media, through that kind of third-party validation. So whenever we do,
Shane, sorry to interrupt, just to make you aware of the time, we've got a few questions in the chat, so I don't want to hurry you along, but just to let you know of the time.
Yeah, no worries. I'm just about to finish up, so two kind of last slides.
Perfect.
Yeah, so whenever we send out the coverage, we have kind of various things that we kind of we look at, so we want to kind of look at metrics in terms of the impact of it. So here's again kind of some examples of things that we've kind of where we've press released something, and then we've got kind of a lot of coverage and what's happened. So increased intention results in kind of huge outmetric scores through widespread coverage in the media and social media. Most publishers now will include this as part of kind of their packages on papers. This is also can result in increased citations for papers, that have been covered in the media. I should also say, aware of the audience that association isn't causation, but these are things that have press release and what we've seen and it's happened around them. So we can see the increase in citations. During COVID, we rarely would press release of preprints, but sometimes in COVID we needed to kind of get kind of important public health information out there. One of the examples here is a preprint that we press release that we sent out about kind of Omicron. It was one of the first data in the world to find that it wasn't as severe as Delta, and the preprint was downloaded 20,000 times after it was widely covered in the media. And then other metrics that you might kind of consider, so the coverage that we had around kind of, again, another COVID study that kind of identified clinical characteristics of patients. This was helped guide treatment by knowing who was most at risk in terms of prioritizing resources. it opens new research pathways. By knowing what genes were involved with severe COVID, we were able to advise kind of researchers that, you know, what drugs they could be putting into their clinical trials. It can help change government policy. So whenever, after the first kind of data came out around AstraZeneca from Edinburgh, there was governments around the world who changed kind of their policies in terms of vaccination to say that AstraZeneca could be used in older patients. And then also when we put saying kind of it helps guide public health messaging. So after publication of data looking at COVID in pregnancy and finding that COVID was actually more severe in those who are unvaccinated, it resulted in a lot of kind of countries around the world kind of issuing guidance to, like, stronger guidance to pregnant women to go out there and get vaccinated. And in Scotland, we've seen an increase in kind of those vaccinations after that as well. So that's me. So I'll just hand over to UK for questions.
Brill, thank you so much, both of you. You've both been so busy and done so many amazing things. It's great to see impact. Leanne, we've got a couple of questions for you in the chat. So, how big is your team at the BHF, and what would you focus on? Like, what has the biggest impact? If you could only do one or two of your public engagement activities, what would you do?
Yeah, so the first question, I'm part of the Research Engagement Directorate, which is made up of many different teams, including my team, the Research Engagement team who bring research to life, or the Alumni and Networks team who work with past and present BHF researchers. Within the Directorate as well, there's engagement events who lead on the logistics of events, you know, such as the Heart Hero Awards. We've got the Heart Story team who work with case studies, so people who have a heart condition. And then there's the science comm specialists who are the bridge between the medical directorate, so they're the ones who award the funding, and the marketing, fundraising, and engagement directorate. So yeah, I'm within a wider team, which includes all of those teams I just mentioned. And then the second part of that question, I think anything that brings the cause to life. So I find that sometimes when you talk about research in solitude, it doesn't make as much impact. Whenever we marry that up with a case study, so, you know, this researcher at King's College London is working on this piece of research. How is it going to help a real life person that is alive today? I think that makes most impact when we marry those two together.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Shane, Neil posted in the chat about the infographics that Usher do about E2, and I think they do have a really good, some really lovely infographics, if anyone wants to check them out. So Leanne, another one for you. This is from Phil. Phil, thanks for this. So have you considered using other centres like Manchester and Birmingham for your scientific events, such as like Cheltenham Science Festival and things like that?
Yeah. So ever since I've been at the BHF, we've been to different places. I just mentioned those, but we've been to Glastonbury. We've been to the Great Exhibition Road Festival at Imperial College London. We've been to Norwich Science Festival, the Royal Society Summer Science Exhibition. Yeah, so we do try as much as we can to go around the country. Obviously, during the pandemic, that stopped a little bit, but we're
brilliant. Great. And Amanda, you've just mentioned about Shane and the raising awareness. I agree. There's been so much good stuff, especially around COVID, done in the media. So I just had a really quick question. Sorry to cheers, rights and all that, privileges. Just about, like, Leanne, you talked about policy, and so did you, Shane, and just like how you kind of link those two things up, like how, you know, if you did like a visit with policymakers, I know you do that at the university and in the BHF, do they come to you or do you tend to go to them to set up a visit?
So we go, if it's from the BHF, I mean, that's the policy team, which I don't sit with them, but yeah, they usually come to us, and well, I mean, the policy team come to my team and we get in touch with the researchers themselves about whether they would like to get involved.
Shane, what about you?
Yeah, so our stakeholder relations team, which I suppose is the same as the policy team, it's I think generally, yeah, they will come to us, you know, but sometimes, so, you know, if well, I might advise, you know, if an academic came to us and said, you know, I really want to kind of, like, you know, I think that, you know, this is being discussed in Parliament at the moment, and it's not, I don't think there is a bit kind of nuance and things like that. I think by working with the stakeholders relations team, they can help in terms of how you might, you know, craft a letter to an MP or an MSP, and kind of, and also, you know, as part of that, you may then kind of offer to invite kind of someone in to see your work. But I would advise kind of working kind of with your stakeholder relations, or sometimes they're called external affairs, or your policy team on that, you know, because there's certain ways that you draft a letter to a politician, and they're very kind of insightful with that.
Brilliant, that's a good tip actually. Great, I'm just aware of the time, so unless anyone's got another question, I don't think I can see hands or anything up. So shall we round up there? I think I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that we have a public survey at the moment, and we would love to get as many people to answer that as possible. Jackie is going to post it in the chat and we can send it to anyone else, but if you had a quick 10 minutes to fill that out, that would be great. It's about, we're developing an app about heart health, and we want as many people to comment on data privacy concerns and that as possible. So Jackie will put that in the chat, or she has done it already. So thank you so much. Yeah, so thank you both so much. That was so interesting, and loads of food for thought and ideas that that I've had kind of during the call. So we'll be in touch, and if anyone has any further questions, just get in touch with us. Otherwise, we'll see you next month.
Thanks again.